What started as routine promotion turned into television chaos when Ryan Gosling confronted Jimmy Kimmel over relentless mockery, leading to the most explosive talk show meltdown in years. The studio audience settled into their seats, expecting another typical night of celebrity banter and promotional segments. Ryan Gosling had arrived to discuss his upcoming film, but tension was already brewing behind the scenes. Sources close to production revealed that Gosling had expressed concerns about Kimmel's recent jokes, targeting his personal life and career choices during his monologues over the past month. As the cameras rolled and Kimmel's signature grin spread across his face, he launched into his opening remarks with characteristic smugness. "Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome the guy who thinks he's too cool for everything, including apparently showing up on time tonight. Ryan Gosling." The audience applauded, but those paying attention noticed Gosling's jaw tighten as he walked onto the stage. The interview began innocuously enough, with standard questions about Gosling's latest project. However, Kimmel couldn't resist his trademark passive-aggressive humor. "So Ryan, tell us about this new movie. I'm sure it's another one where you stare intensely at things and barely speak, right? That seems to be your whole thing these days." The audience laughed, but Gosling's smile appeared forced. "Actually, Jimmy, it's a complex character study that explores themes of redemption and human connection," Gosling replied diplomatically, though his tone carried an edge that viewers would later dissect frame by frame. Kimmel leaned back in his chair, clearly enjoying himself. "Oh, right, sorry. I forgot you're a serious actor now. Not like when you were dating pop stars and doing romantic comedies. Those were simpler times, weren't they?" The comment hit its mark, referencing Gosling's past relationship with Eva Mendes in a way that felt unnecessarily personal and invasive. The atmosphere in the studio shifted noticeably. Gosling's publicist, seated in the green room, was reportedly seen reaching for her phone, likely preparing damage control strategies. Meanwhile, Kimmel's writing team watched from the sidelines, some exchanging uncomfortable glances as their boss pushed boundaries that seasoned entertainment professionals recognized as dangerous territory. "You know what, Jimmy?" Gosling said, his voice remaining steady but his posture straightening. "I've been watching your show for weeks now, and I keep hearing my name in your monologues. Jokes about my acting style, my personal life, my career choices. It's starting to feel less like comedy and more like harassment." The studio fell silent. This wasn't scripted banter or playful celebrity ribbing. This was real tension. Broadcast. Live to millions of viewers who suddenly found themselves witnessing something far more authentic than typical late-night television. Kimmel's response revealed his true character. Instead of acknowledging the valid concern or attempting to diffuse the situation professionally, he doubled down with a dismissive laugh. "Oh, come on, Ryan. Don't be so sensitive. This is comedy. If you can't handle a few jokes, maybe you shouldn't be in Hollywood." His condescending tone suggested he viewed his guest as nothing more than content for his entertainment mill. Sensitive? Gosling's voice remained controlled, but something dangerous flickered in his eyes. "Jimmy, there's a difference between comedy and bullying. What you've been doing isn't clever or funny. It's just mean-spirited. And frankly, it says more about you than it does about me." The audience, uncertain how to react, provided scattered, nervous laughter. Kimmel's face flushed slightly, caught off guard by Gosling's direct confrontation. Years of celebrity compliance had clearly made him comfortable with pushing boundaries, without consequence. "Bullying?" Kimmel scoffed, his voice rising slightly. "That's rich coming from someone who's made a career out of being moody and mysterious. Maybe if you showed some personality once in a while, people wouldn't have to make jokes about you being a robot." The insult landed with devastating precision, and Gosling's expression hardened completely. What had started as a professional disagreement was rapidly escalating into something much more personal and destructive. The veteran actor leaned forward in his chair, and those familiar with his work recognized the same intensity he brought to his most powerful dramatic roles. You want to see personality, Jimmy? Gosling's voice dropped to a deadly whisper that somehow carried perfectly through the studio's microphones. Let's talk about your personality. Let's talk about how you think it's acceptable to mock your guests before they even arrive. Let's discuss how you've built your entire career on making people uncomfortable for your own entertainment. Kimmel's face turned red as he realized he had seriously miscalculated. This wasn't going according to his usual script where celebrities laughed off his jabs and played along with his brand of humor. Gosling wasn't backing down, and the situation was spiraling beyond his control. I think you need to calm down there, Ryan, Kimmel stammered, attempting to regain control of his own show. We're just having fun here. Maybe you should learn to take a joke. But Gosling was far from finished, and what he said next would change everything. Take a joke? Gosling stood up slowly from his chair, towering over the visibly shrinking host. Jimmy, I've been in this industry for over 2 decades. I know the difference between good-natured ribbing and what you do. You don't make jokes. You make targets. And tonight, you picked the wrong one. The studio audience sat in stunned silence as the confrontation reached a boiling point. Camera operators instinctively zoomed in, capturing every micro-expression, as Hollywood's typically reserved leading man unleashed years of pent-up frustration. With the entertainment industry's toxic culture. You want to know what's really funny, Jimmy? Gosling continued, his voice gaining strength with each word. What's hilarious is watching a man who peaked making prank calls on radio try to tear down people who've actually earned their success through talent and hard work. You've spent weeks mocking my acting style, but at least I have one. What's your talent exactly? Reading jokes other people write while sitting behind a desk? Kimmel's face went from red to pale in seconds. His usual arsenal of dismissive quips and deflection tactics seemed to abandon him completely. The host who built his career on making others squirm now found himself on the receiving end, and he was crumbling under the pressure. Now hold on just a minute, Kimmel stammered, his voice cracking slightly. This is my show, and I won't be spoken to like this. You're a guest here, and you need to show some respect. Gosling's laugh was cold and humorless. Respect? That's fascinating coming from someone who just spent 10 minutes disrespecting me on national television. You want respect, Jimmy? Try earning it instead of demanding it. The tension in the studio was so thick it felt suffocating. Audience members shifted uncomfortably in their seats, some pulling out phones to record what was clearly becoming a historic television moment. Kimmel's band leader looked mortified, unsure whether to attempt comic relief or remain invisible. Kimmel, desperate to regain control of the situation, made his biggest mistake yet. Listen, Ryan, I think you're having some kind of breakdown here. Maybe you should sit down and we can talk about this after the show. You're embarrassing yourself. The condescending tone and public humiliation attempt was the final straw. Gosling's eyes flashed with genuine anger as he stepped closer to Kimmel's desk. Embarrassing myself? Jimmy, the only embarrassing thing here is watching a grown man hide behind a desk and a laugh track while trying to destroy people for entertainment. I'm not trying to destroy anyone, Kimmel protested weakly, but his defense sounded hollow, even to himself. Really? Gosling pulled out his phone, his movements deliberate and threatening. Because I have a folder here with screenshots of every joke you've made about me in the past month. Jokes about my relationship, my career, my personal life. Tell me, Jimmy, when exactly did I become your obsession? What did I do to deserve this level of attention from you? The question hung in the air like a challenge. Kimmel's mouth opened and closed several times, but no words came out. The man who made his living with quick comebacks and sharp wit was completely speechless, exposed as nothing more than a bully who had finally been confronted by his victim. That's what I thought, Gosling said quietly. You can't answer because there is no answer. I didn't do anything to you, Jimmy. You just decided I was an easy target because I don't usually fight back. Well, congratulations. You finally got a reaction. The studio's atmosphere had shifted from uncomfortable tension to something approaching genuine hostility. Even the crew members seemed to be choosing sides, with several nodding in agreement with Gosling's assessment of their boss's behavior. Kimmel, sensing he was losing control of his own show, attempted one last desperate play. "Security," he called, out weakly, though his voice carried no real authority. "I think we need to escort Mr. Gosling out of here." The request was met with stunned silence. No security personnel moved. Even they seemed to recognize that removing the guest who was speaking truth to power would be a career-ending mistake caught on live television. Gosling shook his head in disgust. "And there it is. When you can't win an argument, you call security. When you can't handle being challenged, you try to have people removed. This is exactly who you are, Jimmy. A coward who can dish it out but can't take it." The audience began to murmur among themselves, and for the first time in years it wasn't laughter filling Kimmel's studio. It was the sound of people witnessing something real and raw, something that stripped away the carefully constructed facade of late-night television. But Gosling wasn't done dismantling Jimmy Kimmel's carefully crafted persona, and his next words would expose something even darker about the host's character. "You know what the real tragedy is here, Jimmy?" Gosling's voice dropped to an ominous whisper that somehow carried to every corner of the studio. "I've talked to other people in this industry, other actors, musicians, directors, and guess what? You do this to everyone. This isn't about me. This is about you needing to tear people down to feel powerful." The accusation hit Kimmel like a physical blow. His face went ashen as he realized Gosling wasn't just defending himself. He was speaking for every celebrity who had ever felt violated by Kimmel's brand of humor, but remained silent out of professional necessity. "Sarah told me about what you said to her backstage last year," Gosling continued, referencing a conversation that clearly struck terror into Kimmel's heart. "About how you made her feel like garbage before she even walked out here. And Marcus. Remember Marcus? The young actor you humiliated so badly he didn't want to do press tours anymore? Yeah, we talk, Jimmy. We all talk." The studio audience was no longer just watching entertainment. They were witnessing a reckoning. Gosling had transformed from guest to prosecutor, methodically building a case against a man who had spent years hiding behind the protection of his platform and network backing. Kimmel's hands visibly shook as he reached for his water glass. "Those are private conversations," he managed to stammer. You don't understand the context." "Context?" Gosling's laugh was sharp and cruel. "The context is that you're a serial bully who targets people when they're vulnerable. The context is that you've created a toxic environment where celebrities are afraid to speak up because you control access to audiences. But here's the thing. Jimmy, I don't need you. I don't need this show. I don't need your approval or your platform." The power dynamic in the studio had completely reversed. Kimmel, who began the evening as the confident host in control of his domain, now sat cowering behind his desk, while his guest dominated the conversation and exposed him as a fraud. "I've been patient," Gosling continued, pacing slightly as his anger built to a crescendo. "I've been professional. I've played by your rules and everyone else's rules for years. But watching you tonight, seeing how you operate, listening to you dismiss legitimate criticism as sensitivity, it's made me realize something important." He stopped pacing and fixed Kimmel with a stare that could have cut glass. "People like you only understand one language, consequences. And tonight, you're finally going to face some." Kimmel tried desperately to regain control. "Now look, Ryan, I think we're both getting a little heated here. Why don't we take a commercial break?" And no, the word came out like a gunshot, stopping Kimmel mid-sentence. "No commercial break, no edit, no do-over. This is live television, Jimmy. And for once in your career, you're going to face the truth about yourself without a script or a safety net." The audience was completely silent now, hanging on every word. This wasn't just a celebrity feud. This was a masterclass in confrontation, with Gosling systematically dismantling everything Kimmel thought he knew about power and control in Hollywood. "You want to know what's really pathetic?" Gosling continued. "His assault. You could have been great at this. You could have been a host who elevated people, who made them feel welcome, who used humor to bring joy instead of pain. Instead, you chose to be a parasite, feeding off other people's discomfort for cheap laughs." Kimmel's breathing became visibly labored. Years of unchecked behavior were catching up to him in real time, broadcast to millions of viewers who were recording every second of his humiliation. "I've done more for charity than you ever have," Kimmel tried weakly, grasping for any defense that might restore his image. Gosling's response was swift and merciless. "Charity work doesn't erase cruelty, Jimmy. Being generous with money doesn't excuse being cruel with words. You don't get to balance the scales by writing checks while destroying people's confidence and mental health for entertainment." The studio felt like a courtroom now, with Gosling as both judge and prosecutor delivering a verdict that had been years in the making. Kimmel's usual supporters, his band, his writing staff, even some audience members who typically laughed at everything, sat in stunned silence. "Here's what's going to happen," Gosling announced with the authority of someone who had completely seized control of the situation. "I'm going to walk out of here, and you're going to sit there and think about what kind of person you've become. And maybe, just maybe, you'll realize that comedy doesn't have to come at the expense of human dignity." But as Gosling turned toward the exit, Kimmel made one final, desperate attempt to salvage his reputation that would prove to be his ultimate downfall. "Running away already?" Kimmel called out, his voice cracking with desperation. "I guess this, is what passes for the famous Ryan Gosling intensity, throwing a tantrum and storming off when things don't go your way." Gosling stopped dead in his tracks, his shoulders tensing visibly. The studio collectively held its breath as he slowly turned around, and the look in his eyes was absolutely terrifying. Kimmel had just made the worst mistake of his career. "A tantrum?" Gosling's voice was deadly quiet as he walked back toward the desk. "Jimmy, I've been nothing but professional tonight. I came here to promote a film, answered your questions respectfully, and only responded when you crossed the line. But you just can't help yourself, can you? Even when you're losing, even when you're exposed, you still have to get that last shot in." The audience watched in horrified fascination as Gosling approached Kimmel's desk with predatory precision. The host, realizing too late that he had awakened something dangerous, pressed himself back into his chair, as if trying to disappear. "You want to see what a real tantrum looks like?" Gosling placed both hands on Kimmel's desk and leaned forward until their faces were mere inches apart. "Here's your tantrum, Jimmy. This is what happens when a decent person finally reaches their breaking point with a bully." Kimmel's breathing became rapid and shallow. Sweat beaded on his forehead as he found himself trapped between his desk and a man who had reached the absolute limit of his patience. "I want you to look at me," Gosling commanded, his voice carrying an authority that made everyone in the studio straighten up. "Look directly at me and tell this audience why you think it's acceptable to mock people's personal lives for entertainment. Explain to them why you believe your need for cheap laughs justifies making other human beings feel worthless." Kimmel's mouth opened and closed several times, but no sound came out. The man who made his living with words had been rendered completely speechless by the intensity of Gosling's presence and the righteousness of his anger. "Nothing to say now?" Gosling continued his relentless assault. "Where are all those clever quips? Where's that razor-sharp wit you're so famous for? Or does it only work when you're punching down at people who can't fight back?" The studio cameras captured every second of Kimmel's complete psychological collapse. His face was pale, his hands shaking, his eyes darting around the room looking for escape or rescue that would never come. "You know what the really sad part is, Jimmy?" Gosling's voice softened slightly but somehow became even more menacing. "You could have just apologized. At any point tonight, you could have said, 'You're right, I went too far and I'm sorry.' But your ego is so massive, your need to be right is so desperate, that you'd rather destroy yourself on live television than admit you were wrong. The truth of those words hit Kimmel like a physical blow. He visibly sagged in his chair, the fight completely drained out of him, as he realized the magnitude of his miscalculation. "This is who you really are," Gosling announced to the studio and the millions watching at home. "This is Jimmy Kimmel, without his script, without his writers, without his carefully constructed persona. A small, insecure man who builds himself up by tearing others down." With that final judgment delivered, Gosling straightened up and adjusted his jacket with calm precision. "Ladies and gentlemen," he addressed the stunned audience directly, "this has been educational. I hope you've learned as much about your host tonight as I have." He turned back to Kimmel one last time. "Good luck explaining this to your network, Jimmy. Good luck explaining it to your family. Good luck explaining it to yourself when you're lying awake tonight wondering how you became this person." Without another word, Gosling walked toward the exit with the same calm dignity he had maintained throughout the entire ordeal. The studio remained completely silent except for the sound of his footsteps echoing across the stage. As he reached the exit, Gosling paused and looked back at the wreckage he was leaving behind. Kimmel sat motionless at his desk, staring into space like a man who had just watched his career implode in real time. The audience remained frozen in their seats, unsure how to process what they had witnessed. "Cut to commercial," someone from the crew finally whispered, but the damage was already done. The footage was live, unedited, and spreading across social media at lightning speed. Ryan Gosling pushed through the exit doors and walked into the night, leaving behind a host whose reputation would never recover, and a studio full of people who had just witnessed the most spectacular takedown in television history. The confrontation that began with mockery had ended with complete destruction, and justice had been served in the most public way possible.